The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, a sterile hum that matched the cold sting of the hospital air. I sat there, my hands clenched so tightly my knuckles looked bone white, as every eye in the room turned toward me. My parents' faces were pale, frantic, while she, my so-called sister, smirked faintly from her hospital bed, like even sickness couldn't dim her superiority. "You're the only match," the doctor said, his voice a gavel striking. "If you don't donate, she won't make it." Gasps filled the room. My mother clutched her pearls. My father's jaw tightened like stone. And then her eyes, those same eyes that once watched me lose everything because of her lies, locked onto mine. Not with gratitude, not even fear, but entitlement. "She'll do it," my mother declared, before I'd spoken a single word. But I did speak. Slowly, deliberately, each word cut sharper than a scalpel. "No, I won't." The silence that followed wasn't silence at all. It was the sound of a family breaking. And yet, deep inside, I knew this wasn't the moment she destroyed me. This was the moment I began to take everything back. Before all of this, before torn checks and slammed doors, I lived my life quietly, almost invisibly. I wasn't chasing spotlights or recognition. I worked long hours at the small office downtown, balancing accounts and filing reports, with the kind of patience no one ever praised, but everyone relied on. Numbers didn't lie. And in a family full of excuses and favoritism, that steadiness became my safe harbor. I lived in the house my grandfather left me, a modest 2-bedroom place with faded shutters and a creaky porch swing that sang whenever the wind leaned against it. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The deed sat neatly tucked into a fireproof box at the back of my closet, a box that also held a photograph of Grandpa and me fishing at the lake. His wrinkled hands were steady on the rod, mine clumsy but determined. "What you earn, you protect," he used to say. That phrase became my anchor. My father, though, believed in something else. What you want, you take. And what you couldn't take, you demanded. He'd always favored my younger brother, Tyler. Tyler, with his reckless grin and endless string of half-baked dreams. Mechanic one day, entrepreneur the next, always needing someone else to foot the bill. Dad called it investing in potential. I called it what it was, enabling. At family gatherings, the favoritism wasn't hidden. I remember one 4th of July barbecue where Dad handed Tyler the biggest steak from the grill, slapping it onto his plate with a proud, "That's my boy." I got the burnt hot dog no one else wanted. Mom chuckled nervously, pretending it was a joke, but the laughter in the air was sharp-edged like broken glass. It was always like that. When I saved up for my first car, Dad borrowed it for Tyler, who totaled it within 6 months. When I earned a scholarship, Dad said Tyler needed it more, and pressured me to decline. Even when Grandpa passed and left me this house, specifically me, by name in the will, Dad still referred to it as the family home, like my name on the deed was just a technicality. I bit my tongue more times than I can count. Peace was easier than war, I told myself, until the inheritance money came into play. Grandpa had left me a separate account, money he'd built slowly over decades, money meant to secure my future. I never touched it, never flaunted it. But Dad knew it was there, and so did Tyler. One evening, as the cicadas screamed outside and the sun dipped low behind the maple trees, Dad cornered me in the kitchen. "Your brother's truck is breaking down," he said, his tone already set as if the decision had been made. "He needs something reliable for work. We're using your inheritance." I froze, spatula still in my hand from flipping eggs. "That money isn't for a truck," I said quietly. Dad's eyes narrowed, sharp as a hawk spotting prey. "Don't be selfish. Family comes first. Always selfish." The word dug deep, familiar and heavy, like a chain I'd worn my whole life. I said nothing, but inside, something cracked. Weeks later, when Tyler rolled into the driveway with his shiny new truck, Chrome gleaming under the streetlights, Dad clapped him on the back like he'd conquered the world. Tyler honked the horn twice, laughing, while neighbors came out to admire it. I stood on the porch, the laughter and headlights washing over me. That was the night Dad tore the check in front of everyone, declaring that my inheritance wasn't mine at all. That was the night humiliation sank its claws into me, and whispers followed me like shadows. But in my room later, I opened the fireproof box and pulled out the deed Grandpa left me. The edges were crisp, the ink permanent. Unlike checks, it couldn't be torn in half. Unlike promises, it couldn't be revoked. And in that moment, I realized the house wasn't just shelter. It was leverage. It was proof. The very thing Dad had overlooked was the thing that would undo him. Foreshadow voiceover. He thought he owned everything I had. He was wrong, and soon everyone would know it. The weeks after the truck incident were a blur of quiet hostility. My father strutted around like he'd won a war. Tyler revved his engine every chance he got, and I moved through my own home as though I were a guest. The humiliation from that night clung to me like smoke that wouldn't wash out. At first, I tried to ignore it. I buried myself in work, staying late at the office just to avoid the heavy silence that waited at home. But silence has a way of sharpening tension. My father filled the air with small jabs, reminders of who held the reins. "You're lucky we let you stay here," he'd say, sipping his coffee at my table. My house. One morning, I came down to find him rearranging my living room furniture, barking orders at Tyler about where to move the couch. When I asked what they were doing, Dad didn't even glance at me. This is the family home. It should look like it. The word family again, his weapon of choice. Family meant control. Family meant my voice didn't matter. Neighbors started whispering too. Word spread that I was stingy, that I'd refused to help my own brother. A woman from down the street stopped me at the mailbox and said, "Don't worry, honey. Tyler will pay you back someday." Her pity was almost worse than their laughter. At night, I lay awake listening to Tyler's truck roar to life at midnight, the headlights flashing across my window like taunts. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. Sleep came in fragments, dreams fractured by anxiety. My hair began to thin from stress, and my reflection looked like a ghost's. Hollow eyes, tight jaw, shoulders always tensed. The worst was dinner one Sunday. Dad carved the roast, passing the best cuts to Tyler, while my plate sat empty. "A provider takes care of his family," he said loudly, staring right at me. Tyler smirked, shoving a forkful into his mouth. The relatives laughed nervously. That's when something snapped. I pushed my chair back, the scrape echoing louder than laughter. My hands shook, but my voice came out steady. "Your guests in my house. Don't forget that." The room went silent. Even Tyler's smirk faltered. Dad's face hardened, his jaw working as though chewing on rage. He didn't shout. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, smiling coldly. "Guests," he repeated. "We'll see how long that lasts." That night, fear kept me awake. I imagined them changing locks, filing papers, twisting words until somehow my house became theirs. But the next morning, as I shuffled through the mail, I found a letter from an old friend, Laura, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She'd heard whispers about my situation through mutual contacts. "Don't let them make you small," her note said. "You're stronger than you think, and you're not alone." The words were simple, but they hit like a lifeline tossed into stormy waters. I sat on the porch swing, letter trembling in my hands, tears blurring the ink. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than dread. Maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe there were allies out there, waiting for me to stop suffering in silence. And when I looked up, the maple tree outside my yard rustled with wind, its leaves whispering like Grandpa's voice. "What you earn, you protect." I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into the fireproof box beside the deed. That box wasn't just storage anymore. It was my arsenal. But Dad wasn't done. He was just getting started. Cliffhanger voiceover. That was the first time someone reminded me I wasn't alone. And that reminder changed everything. It didn't take long for Dad to escalate. Humiliation and whispers weren't enough. He wanted control written in ink, carved into stone. One rainy afternoon, I came home to find Dad and Tyler seated at my kitchen table with a man in a gray suit. Papers were spread across the surface, like a battlefield map. The man looked up with a polite but hollow smile. "We're just discussing some family arrangements," Dad said smoothly, gesturing to the papers. "Tyler's moving in permanently. It's only right we put the deed in all our names." The air went thin. My pulse hammered in my ears. "That deed is mine," I said, my voice sharper than I expected. The lawyer, if that's what he was, cleared his throat. "Your father tells me the house has always been considered a family asset. Legally, it may be open to contest." "Legally?" My laugh was bitter. "The will is in my name. The deed is in my name. There's nothing to contest." Dad leaned back, folding his arms, eyes glinting. "We'll see." Courts don't always side with selfishness. It was a threat, plain as day. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old house felt like betrayal, like it might give way under the pressure of their schemes. My hands shook as I typed late into the night, searching for lawyers, for advice, for anyone who could tell me I wasn't crazy. But every site warned the same. Legal battles were costly, and Dad knew I didn't have endless money to burn. Days passed, and the pressure mounted. Tyler blasted music in the driveway, his friends lounging on the truck bed, laughing loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "House won't be yours forever," one of them muttered as I walked past. My cheeks burned, but I said nothing. Then came the police lights. It was a Friday night, rain falling in silver sheets. I opened the door to 2 officers standing on my porch. Their expressions were blank, professional. "We've had a noise complaint," one said, though his eyes flicked toward Tyler's truck blaring in the drive. But when I explained it wasn't me, Dad stepped out of the shadows, his face a picture of concern. "She's been unstable," he told the officers smoothly. "She doesn't want to admit she's struggling. We're just trying to keep her safe." My stomach dropped. Unstable. The word was poison. The officers looked at me, searching my face for cracks. I steadied my breathing, forcing calm into my voice. "This is my house. I own it. I am fine." My hands trembled, but I held their gaze until finally they nodded and left. The humiliation left me shaking. He wasn't just trying to take my home. He was trying to rewrite who I was. But that night, I unlocked the fireproof box again. I spread the papers across my bed. The will, the deed, old letters Grandpa had written, even tax documents proving the house was mine alone. Piece by piece, it formed a shield, my shield. And then, almost by fate, my phone buzzed. It was Laura, the old friend who'd written me that letter. She worked for a property management firm now, and when I told her everything, she grew quiet. Finally, she said, "Do you know how much leverage you actually have? They're living in your house. You could be charging rent. You could even evict them." The word evict sent a shock through me. I had been so focused on surviving their attacks, I hadn't realized I had weapons of my own. Dad thought he was cornering me, but in truth, he'd walked straight into my territory. Voiceover. They thought they still had control. They didn't. And the moment I realized that, everything shifted. And when the first rent notice went out, addressed to my father in crisp black ink, the cracks in his smug mask finally began to show. The rent notice was the first shot in a war I hadn't wanted but could no longer avoid. I slid the envelope under my father's door one quiet morning, my heart hammering. Just a simple line. $1,800 due on the first of every month. Fair market value. Nothing cruel, Nothing personal, just business. For a few hours, the house was silent. Then Dad stormed into the kitchen, the paper crumpled in his fist. "You think you can treat me like some tenant?" His voice shook with fury, but beneath it I saw something I hadn't seen before. Fear. "You are a tenant," I said calmly, even though my insides quaked. "This house is mine. If you want to stay, you pay." He threw the paper onto the counter and stormed out. Tyler followed, muttering curses under his breath. That night, the truck engine revved louder than ever, headlights slicing through my bedroom curtains like knives. And then the rumors began. Neighbors stopped waving at me. At the grocery store, I overheard hushed voices. "Did you hear? She's charging her own father rent. Kicked him to the curb." At church, a woman leaned over and whispered, "I'll be praying for your heart to soften." Dad and Tyler were spreading poison through every corner of the community, painting me as cold, ungrateful, cruel. The isolation pressed in from all sides. Even at work, coworkers asked, "Everything okay at home?" in tones heavy with judgment. At night, I sat at the kitchen table with stacks of papers, rent notices, utility bills, the deed, the will. I began keeping a journal, documenting every insult, every manipulation, every police call. My handwriting grew sharper with each entry, like a blade being honed. But documenting wasn't enough. I needed allies. Laura became my lifeline. Over coffee one rainy afternoon, she leaned across the table and whispered, "They're trying to bury you with noise. You bury them with proof." She connected me with a lawyer who specialized in property disputes. The lawyer's first words made my chest unclench for the first time in weeks. "They don't have a leg to stand on." Meanwhile, I made quiet changes in the house. A new lock on the fireproof box. Hidden cameras in the living room, just in case. Copies of every document stored in the cloud. Every step made me feel less like prey and more like a strategist. But Dad sensed the shift. His smirk grew tighter, his patience thinner. One evening, he cornered me in the hall, his voice low and venomous. "You think you've won because of a piece of paper? You're nothing without this family. Remember that." For the first time, I didn't shrink back. I looked him straight in the eye. "You're right," I said evenly. "I'm nothing without family. But I'm everything without parasites." His face went red, a vein throbbing at his temple. He walked away without another word. Tyler, on the other hand, lashed out more openly. He scratched my car door, left muddy boot prints across the hallway, even accidentally knocked over the photo of Grandpa and me fishing. The frame cracked, glass splintering across the floor. I picked up the photo carefully, brushing shards from Grandpa's smile. That photo had been my quiet comfort for years, a reminder of where I came from. Now, broken, it became something else, a reminder of what I was fighting for. The symbolic objects, the deed, the photo, even the rent notices, were no longer just papers. They were weapons. And through it all, I kept building my case. Dates, times, witnesses, every cruel word preserved like ammunition. Dad thought his smear campaign would break me, but instead, it hardened me, because the day of reckoning was coming, and when it arrived, I wouldn't be the one trembling. Cliffhanger voiceover. The day of reckoning was coming, and no one could stop it. The summons came on a Wednesday, tucked neatly into my mailbox. My father had filed a claim, arguing the house belonged to the family, and that I had no right to demand rent. For days, I walked around in a fog, even though my lawyer assured me the law was on my side. I couldn't shake the thought of standing in that courtroom, every eye fixed on me, every whisper ready to brand me the villain. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully, not flashy, not timid, steady. Black slacks, a crisp white shirt, and the small silver watch Grandpa had given me when I graduated. It ticked softly on my wrist, like a heartbeat reminding me I wasn't alone. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in a cold, unforgiving glow. My father sat at the plaintiff's table, shoulders squared, smugness radiating. Tyler leaned back in his chair beside him, twirling his truck keys as though this were a game. When the judge entered, the room hushed. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe. Dad's lawyer began with a speech dripping in sentiment. This house has always been the heart of the family. It is unjust that one child seeks to exclude the others, treating her own father as a tenant. I clenched my fists under the table, nails biting into my palms. Lies, all of it, carefully constructed lies. Then it was my turn. I rose slowly, papers in hand, and walked to the front. My heels clicked against the floor, each step steadier than the last. I laid the deed before the judge, followed by Grandpa's will, the tax records, and copies of every rent notice. "This isn't about family," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. "It's about control. My grandfather left this house to me, by name. These documents prove it. My father and brother chose to live here, and I gave them that chance. All I asked was fairness. Instead, they spread lies, called the police on me, and tried to erase my rights." The room was silent, every ear tuned to my words. I held up the cracked photo of Grandpa and me fishing, the glass repaired but the fractures still visible. "This photo was broken in my own home. My family tried to break me too, but I won't let them rewrite what my grandfather entrusted to me." For the first time, Dad's mask slipped. His hands twitched on the table, his jaw clenched. Tyler's smirk faltered, his keys stilled. The judge leaned forward, eyes scanning the documents. "The deed is clear. The will is clear. This property belongs solely to the defendant." His voice echoed, final, unshakable. "The claim is dismissed. Furthermore, the occupants have 30 days to either pay the agreed rent or vacate the premises." A ripple of gasps moved through the courtroom. Dad's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like he'd swallowed glass. Tyler muttered something under his breath, but the keys slipped from his hand, clattering onto the floor. I turned to them, my voice low but steady, carrying enough weight for everyone to hear. "I don't want apologies. I want change." And for the first time, they had nothing to say. The gavel struck, sharp as thunder, sealing the judgment. I walked out of that courtroom into the sunlight, my shoulders lighter, my breath free. For years I had been quiet, invisible, shoved aside. But not anymore. That day I reclaimed everything they tried to take. And something more. My worth. The 30 days ticked by like the slow swing of a pendulum. Each morning, I marked another red X on the calendar, a silent countdown to freedom. At first, Dad tried to ignore the ruling. He stomped through the halls, slamming doors, muttering about crooked judges and ungrateful children. Tyler sulked, spending long hours in his truck, the engine growling late into the night as though defiance alone could pay rent. But the notices were real. The deadlines were real. And when the final week arrived, reality crashed down like a wave. I'll never forget the morning the moving truck pulled into my driveway. Tyler carried out boxes with a scowl, his truck bed filled with clothes and car parts. Dad followed slowly, dragging a suitcase behind him, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen. The arrogance that once filled every room was gone, replaced by silence and exhaustion. I stood on the porch as they loaded the last of their things. Dad avoided my eyes, but Tyler paused, his smirk twisted into something brittle. "You'll regret this," he muttered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. When the truck drove away, the air around the house shifted. For the first time in years, it felt like mine again. No footsteps echoing with entitlement, no whispered slurs in the hallway, just quiet, peaceful, golden quiet. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the windows, the old wooden banister that had been in the house since Grandpa built it. Every creak of the floorboards now felt like a heartbeat instead of a threat. That night, I took out the fireproof box one last time. I laid the deed on the kitchen table, smoothed its edges, and slipped it into a frame I had bought just for this moment. I hung it in the hallway, right where everyone could see it. A reminder, not just of ownership, but of resilience. Beside it, I placed the repaired photograph of Grandpa and me. The crack in the glass was still visible, but instead of ruining the picture, it gave it character. A scar that told a story, just like me. Life slowly began to bloom again. I repainted the living room in a soft sage green, the color of calm. I fixed the porch swing, tightening the rusted bolts so it swayed smoothly in the evening breeze. I planted marigolds along the walkway, their orange petals blazing like little suns. Each change was more than renovation. It was reclamation. Neighbors noticed, too. The same ones who once whispered now stopped to compliment the flowers, the fresh paint, the sense of newness that radiated from the house. Some avoided me out of guilt, but others apologized quietly, admitting they had believed my father's lies. I didn't hold it against them. People believe what's loudest. I had simply chosen to be steady, not loud. Until now. At work, I felt lighter, more confident. I no longer carried shame on my shoulders. Laura became not just an ally, but a friend again. We laughed over coffee, planned small weekend trips, and dreamed about the future instead of surviving the present. And every night, I sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset through the maple leaves. The air smelled of fresh paint and earth, the sky painted in shades of orange and violet. I felt Grandpa's words in that wind. What you earn, you protect. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Months ago, I had sat on this porch in humiliation as Tyler honked his new truck and Dad smirked in triumph. Now the truck was gone, the smirk erased, and I was still here, stronger than ever. This wasn't just survival. It was transformation. Voiceover, final reflection. They thought taking my inheritance would break me. But in losing them, I found myself, and for the first time, I knew. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Have you ever been pushed aside by the very people who were supposed to protect you? Have you ever felt the sting of favoritism, betrayal, or the abuse of power in your own family? If you've lived through something like this, I want to hear your story. Share it in the comments. Not just for me, but for the people out there who feel like they're fighting alone. You never know who your words might help. Because here's the truth. Worth isn't something they hand you. It isn't something they can take away either. Worth isn't something they give you. It's something you claim for yourself.